SH70 och Kalle. Här får du nyheter och politik. Kritisk granskning i fokus och historien täcker vi också in. Bara sanning och logik, sunt förnuft och fakta på din skärm. SH70, din breda kanal. För ett bättre Sverige tillsammans med Kalle. Bara sanning och logik, sunt förnuft och fakta på din skärm. SH70, din breda kanal. För ett bättre Sverige tillsammans med Kalle.
Ja, men hej alla medborgare. Ja, medborgare förresten. Jag såg häromdagen i någon skrift att vi hade fått 6 000 nya medborgarskap utskrivna bara under januari. Heja Tidöpartierna. Våra kära Tidöpartier, vi vet vem som stöder dem. Nej, det var inte alls jag skulle komma in på. Jag skulle säga bara hej medborgare. Och det här ska inte bli långt därför att det ska visas 2 små klipp. Och det ena klippet som vi ser alldeles strax, det är ju, kan man väl säga att det är inte bara veckans, utan jag tror att det är både månadens och det närmaste halvårets snackis, va? Jag menar, det är en ny kille på en ny häst. A new sheriff come to town. Det här är alltså JD Vance oklippta tal som jag har satt, får jag väl säga, en professionell översättning på. Jag använder mig inte av sådana här Google-översättningar eller vidare, utan det här är riktigt textsatt så att du ska kunna se det bra med och förstå innebörden, hoppas jag. Och någon felfinnare hittar väl alltid något komma eller punktering som sitter fel, men det hör till. Men jag tänkte att jag inte ska faktiskt försöka att inte vara den nu som ska tycka åt dig eller lägga till en massa. Utan köra bara det här och sedan så får det du avgöra, men du får gärna kommentera här nere i kommentarsfältet. Vad innebär det här? Om det innebär någonting alls. Titta nu på den här gossen med skägget som är alltså inte bara den nuvarande vicepresidenten sedan en månad tillbaks. Han är färsk på jobbet. Han kommer snart att bli ännu varmare i jobbet, det kan jag säga. Han verkar funnit sig väl till detta. Bara för lite drygt en månad sedan så var alltså den här madammen vicepresident i USA och alla på vänsterkanten trodde att hon skulle bli nästa president. För er som har lyssnat på henne eller tagit del av henne så hoppas jag att ni kan göra jämförelsen. Och jag vill poängtera att jag inte är gravt emot och är evigt tacksam för att Kacklan inte blev president. För det hade inte varit bra för världen. Det hade inte varit bra för världen alls. Och det är inte för att hon är sån här vänsterdemokrat. Hade hon varit en bra människa, ungefär som Tulsi Gabbard, som också har varit demokrat men som ju nu är ingående i Trumpens regering. Ja, hade hon varit bra så, men en bra människa ska ha en bra position. Men Kamala var inte bra och vi ska vara glada för att hon inte sitter där. Men det är stora delar av västvärlden i övrigt inte alls, bland annat i Europa. Där man av någon märklig anledning tycker att det som har kommit nu, det är det värsta som har hänt. Och nu ska inte jag börja babbla om Trumpen, vad han har gjort på den här korta tiden. För då kommer vi aldrig till skott vad det egentligen ska handla om. Men han måste ha ett inbyggt kärnkraftverk någonstans i sin kropp för att kunna prestera och göra så mycket samtidigt. Det är, ja, man fattar det inte. Men JD Vance, vi ska komma tillbaks till. När det har gått lite mera tid så tänkte jag göra en kort sammanställning av allt som har hänt och vad som har skett. Och nu ser det ju ut som om förhoppningsvis att det kommer riktiga samtal till stånd när det gäller det här med Ukraina och Ryssland. Krisen i kriget som nu måste sluta. Inte en människa till ska dö. Det är alldeles många hittills. Och när det då pratas om fred, då är det massa människor som protesterar. Kommentera gärna det också. För jag förstår det nämligen inte. Jag förstår det inte alls. Nej, men den här killen, JD Vance. Här ser vi, törs jag nästan med säkerhet påstå, Och det ska man ju aldrig påstå, för då förlorar man på travet och bingolott och vad du vill. Men jag tror nog att man nästan kan gissa med stor säkerhet att här ser du nästa president efter Trump. Och grabben är ju bara några av 40, va? Så att han gör 4 år nu som vicepresident. Han blir invald och gör 8 år som president. Då har det gått 12 år. Och då är han väl, ja, han är alltså 55 någonting. Han har liksom gjort klart det bästa man kan göra. Så att den här mannen, han kommer att vara väldigt viktig. Och det tror jag också att de här gubbarna som sitter i den här mötet i München nyligen, att de var också väldigt medvetna om vad det här är för person och vad de har att dras med. Jag tycker att ni ska titta speciellt på, ja, jag ska alltså inte tala om för er, ja, ni hör väl att jag ändå är ganska positivt inställd till JD Vance, men lyssna på vad han säger. Är detta ett av de mest märkliga talen som har hållits på europeisk mark? Va? Och även Sverige är med på ett hörn. Fundera på det. Och framför allt fundera på publiken som knappt ens artighetsapplåderar. De flesta sitter bara oj, jag har fått förstoppning. Det här är så hemskt. Då är frågan, varför är de så? Varför är de så? Säger egentligen den där publiken som är närvarande där, säger den mer än om själva talaren? Lite roligt där förresten, så håll utkik efter Klitschko, den gamla världsmästaren i tungviktsboxning. Han har en speciell profil. Se om du hittar honom där i publiken. Han är ju politiker numera. Nej, jag tycker publiken där säger nästan mer om tillståndet i Europa, för mig i alla fall, än vad hans tal gör. Men vad anser du? Vad anser du? Var det ett dåligt tal? Var det ett bra tal? Var det någonting som är positivt för Europa? Negativt för Europa? Vad befinner vi oss i för situation här i Europa egentligen? Ja, frågorna är många. Finns det några svar? Det är intressant. Nej, jag ska inte hålla på och snacka så väldigt mycket nu, utan vi ska se den här filmen med textningen. Och ja, försök att höra på allting det han passerar, för det är väldigt intressant, tycker jag. Och lägg inte på luren nu precis när det är klart. Jag kommer tillbaks med en liten påannonsering av det sista lilla klippet som är väldigt kort. Nu kör vi Vice President JD Vance i München bara för någon vecka sedan.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the gathered delegates and luminaries and media professionals, and thanks especially to the host of the Munich Security Conference for being able to put on such an incredible event. We're of course thrilled to be here. We're happy to be here, and you know, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, of course, our shared values. And you know, it's great to be back in Germany. As you heard earlier, I was here last year as United States Senator. I saw Foreign Secretary David Lammy, and joked that both of us last year had different jobs than we have now. But now it's time for all of our countries, for all of us who have been fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples, to use it wisely to improve their lives. And I want to say that, you know, I was fortunate in my time here to spend some time outside the walls of this conference over the last 24 hours. And I've been so impressed by the hospitality of the people, even as, of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's horrendous attack. And the first time I was ever in Munich was with my wife, actually, who's here with me today, on a personal trip. And I've always loved the city of Munich, and I've always loved its people. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you, we're praying for you, and we will certainly be rooting for you in the days and weeks to come. Now, I hope that's not the last bit of applause that I get, but we gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany, too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values, we must live them. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizen suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. Now, we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with. Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now, again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say. But when people represent, when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them. Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way or, even worse, win an election. Now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target. And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger. But let me also ask you, how will you even begin to think through the kinds of budgeting questions if we don't know what it is that we are defending in the first place? I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from, and of course that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important? And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results? But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens. If you're going to enjoy competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure supply chains, then you need mandates to govern, because you have to make difficult choices to enjoy all of these things. And of course, we know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win one by disregarding your basic electorate on questions like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course it's gotten much higher since. And we know this situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders. And it is the business of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy. And speaking up and expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk. But what German democracy, what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. You either uphold the principle or you don't. Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice. And my strong belief is that we do not need to be afraid of the future. You can embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or beautiful hotels. It's not even in the great institutions that we have built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little. As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Do not be afraid." We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership. Thank you all. Good luck to all of you. God bless you.
Ja, kära medborgare. Det var väl ett tal det. Och jag tror att många ser det från olika perspektiv. Vad hemskt eller vad bra. Jag är väldigt nyfiken på att höra vad du tycker, så att bomba kommentarsfältet som vanligt, snällt och trevligt. Men det vet jag att de flesta för det mesta alltid gör. Så är det bara. Men innan vi lägger på för idag så ska vi se ett kort klipp med nye försvarsministern Pete Hegseth. Och honom är det tydligen väldigt delade meningar om, men han är vald till försvarsminister. Han är insvuren, det är färdigt och det är klart. Och jag tror att man kan säga att det finns mycket som händer bakom kulisserna just när det gäller Ukraina och Ryssland. Bara så sent som idag innan jag spelade in det här så såg jag ju att Zelensky i Ukraina, han var skogstokig. Vill han inte ha fred? Men han protesterar och han vräker ur sig om USA och det ska vara det ena och det ska vara det andra. Undrar ibland egentligen, funderar de på alla de som dör ute på slagfälten? Det verkar inte vara prio 1 för en del. Nåväl, det här är väldigt kort men väldigt klart, och jag vill också höra dina synpunkter om vad det är han säger här. Jag kan bara lägga till som en liten sån där passus att vi såg ju nyligen att det var någon liten utrikesminister eller försvarsminister från någon av baltstaterna. Jag kommer inte ihåg, Estland, Lettland eller någonting sånt. En tjej som sa att det kan inte bli några förhandlingar mellan Ryssland och Ukraina om inte vi får vara med. Nu kan jag väl säga att det är ju mer eller mindre en officiell hemlighet att de första träffarna, viktiga träffarna, blir mellan Putin och Trump, troligtvis i Saudiarabien inom en ganska snar framtid. Och de åker inte hela vägen dit för att det inte ska hända någonting. Om sedan alla springer omkring och protesterar över det för att få till en fred till slut, då tycker jag vi alla ska fundera på vilka är de som protesterar och varför. Men sista klippet nu, varsågod, tack för idag, vi hörs snart igen. Hej då!
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. This must not be Minsk 3.0. That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops.
Välkommen till SAA70 och Kalle. Får du nyheter och politik. Kritisk granskning i fokus. Och historien täcker vi också in. Bara sanning och logik. Sunt förnuft och fakta på din skärm. SAA70, din breda kanal. För ett bättre Sverige tillsammans med Kalle.